Have we reached a point where the right wing is starting to experience some backlash? Maybe in the United States. I mean, we've seen now for several years in special elections, in kind of individual states and circumstances, that people are rejecting Republican candidates. And I continue to believe that we're going to see a blue wave this fall. I realize the polls don't show that. I don't trust the polls. But we're seeing it now apparently all around the world, or it's kind of like a mixed bag. On the one hand, you're seeing countries going more and more right-wing, in large part in response to immigration. Brown people coming into largely, white countries seem to be a major political motivator for growing right-wing movements, neo-fascist, fundamentally. I mean, let's just call it what it is. It's racism. Fundamentally racist responses. This horrible failure to recognize the essential humanity of people, regardless of the color of their skin. I mean, it's just pigment. We're all people underneath all that skin. But there's a lot of white people who don't buy that. And so we are like in Sweden, in Denmark, in Denmark, to a certain extent in Switzerland. We're seeing it in big time in Germany. I mean, Germany took in 1 million Syrian immigrants under Angela Merkel, and now the Alternative for Deutschland (AfD) party is which has Nazi roots basically, is growing like a weed. And you're seeing that same thing play out here in the United States, with people all freaked out about brown people coming from Mexico. Nobody's freaking out about the hundreds of thousands of Irish and Scottish and other white Europeans who have come to the United States on a tourist visa and then just stayed after it expired. Nobody's complaining about them. It's always about the brown people or the black people, always. But anyhow, in Hungary, and Hungary was one of the early adopters of this, by the way. Viktor Orban based his candidacy in 2010 on building a wall. That was his, this did not start with Trump. Build a wall as a primary campaign slogan began with Viktor Orban in 2010 in response to the Syrian refugees coming into Hungary from as a consequence of Vladimir Putin bombing the crap out of Aleppo, and all these people, fleeing up into the ocean and, getting on boats and going to southern Europe and then traveling up north through Europe and many of them ending up in Hungary. And Orban's campaign slogan was build a wall. And he did, by the way. He did successfully build a giant, double fence with razor wire on top and guard towers and the whole bit, all across the southern border of Hungary and parts of the southeast and southwestern borders of Hungary. But now there's a backlash forming. It's not going to, I don't think, displace Viktor Orban. He has successfully done what Donald Trump and Project 2025 want to do here in America, which is to gerrymander the entire country and rig the voting rolls in a way that people who might be his opponents, particularly regions where there might be opposition to him, cannot vote, or their votes don't get counted, or even when their votes do get counted because of the gerrymandering, it just doesn't matter. So, Orban has done that, and this is not a serious challenge to his leadership of the country, but it is they are taking out Orban now. In fact, there's this one particular guy, his name is Magyar, is his last name. Peter Magyar. And he's a political newcomer. And just in the last 3 months, I mean, he's only been on the stage 3 months now, and 10,000 people showed up in Hungary's second largest city, Debrecen, over this last week to basically protest Orban. To protest, he is shot, this is a quote from The Guardian, he has shot to prominence in less than 3 months by pledging to end official corruption and reverse the declining quality of life in the country. He spoke to this huge crowd. He said, today the vast majority of the Hungarian people are tired of the ruling elite, of the hatred, apathy, propaganda, and artificial divides. Hungarians today want cooperation, love, unity, and peace. He used to be in the Fidesz party, in Orban's party. But he left in February saying that the Fidesz party had become a mafia state and essentially declared war on that government's propaganda machine. He's started a new party. It's called TISA, which stands in Hungarian for Respect and Freedom, and has announced that they're going to run 12 candidates in the European elections. Now, this is not, who's going to run Hungary. This is who's going to run the European Union. In every nation, they have, regional elections for who we're going to send to the European Union, for the European Parliament. And that election will be on June 9th. And they're going to run 4 candidates in local council elections in Budapest. And that's going to be, and that's going to be also in June. It's going to be a real test. Meanwhile, in Great Britain over the weekend, we saw the Tories, the Conservative Party, just get smashed. I mean, just wiped out. Louise and I spent a couple hours on Sunday while we were doing other things, but we had BBC on. And the reporting was just amazing. I mean, mayor races all across the country, only one of them went to the Tories. Local district races. I mean, this is amazing. The Tories could get fewer. Now, this article is written by Robert Kuttner at the Prospect before the election results were finalized. My apologies for not having a more recent piece here, but he writes, the Tories could get fewer than 100 seats in the next House of Commons compared to their current 345. So he notes, in a charming detail, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, whose government altered the election law to require voters to produce photo ID, see, the Republican tricks are traveling all around the world, right? Forgot his ID and was turned away from a polling place. They didn't let Boris Johnson vote. Rishi Sunak, who right now is the British Prime Minister, he writes, is even less popular than his hapless predecessor, Liz Truss, whose tenure only lasted 49 days after she rammed through unfunded tax cuts for the morbidly rich. So, the Conservatives are going down in flames in the UK as well. And I honestly think we're going to be seeing this fall. I think there's a lot of surprises coming. Now, I realize the polls don't bear this out. But like I said, I don't trust the polls. I think polling has become a very, very imprecise science because people have cell phones now instead of landlines, and you have, with cell phones, you have the ability to block callers. I assume Android phones have the same ability that my Apple iPhone has, which is you can just say block all unknown callers. If somebody is not in your contact list, the phone simply does not ring. It just immediately goes to voicemail. And this is making it really hard for pollsters to do their polling. And so they're having to do an awful lot of speculation and kind of filling in the blanks with what they think is really going on. And I don't think what they think is going on is really going on. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative, yet sometimes the evidence is clear.
We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's a beautiful day here in Portland, Oregon, but I understand it's orange skies and stormy weather in New York City. Stormy Daniels is just wrapping up her testimony in New York. It got pretty granular. Yes, missionary position. The judge said that she could not discuss genitalia. In other words, she can't tell the story that she's told so many times about how teeny tiny Donald Trump's penis is. So I don't know, maybe he thought that would offend the jury, or I guess it wasn't relevant to whether Donald Trump paid her off in order to win an election. I mean, that's the thing that blows my mind. Is all morning I kept hearing people on MSNBC refer to this as the hush money trial. This is not a hush money trial. This is an election stealing trial. If this story of Stormy Daniels, keep in mind, 2 weeks before the election, the Access Hollywood tape came out. Dozens of high-profile Republicans called for Donald Trump to step down and Mike Pence to continue as the presidential nominee. 2 weeks before the election. And had the Stormy Daniels story come out, that would have happened. Donald Trump would not have been the Republican Party's nominee. Or if he was, he would have lost miserably. This is about election interference, period, full stop. I don't know why the media won't talk about that. It boggles my mind. Anyway, a lot going on today. What we'll be talking about today, stormy weather, Rafah, and the status of peace talks in the first hour. Also, should protesters be peaceful or is being disruptive to power the whole point? And a crazy alert, right-winger and Christie Noem have a new theory about her book and puppies. Was there a liberal plant editor who inserted unflattering stories about her? Very strange. Very, very strange. In the second hour of our program, are billionaires simply money addicts like Scrooge McDuck? That's my piece today over on HartmannReport.com. Also, the new propaganda war. Ann Applebaum writing about this. I'll share with you my summary of her, what she's writing about. It's pretty shocking stuff. In the third hour, the noble lie and abortion. What's going on in Ohio? And also the trustees, the Medicare and Social Security trustees, just issued a report on the solvency of those programs and how they must be defended against Donald Trump and the Republican Party. I'll share that with you in the third hour of the program. So we've got a lot to talk about today. In the Stormy Daniels testimony today in the Donald Trump election interference trial. It shouldn't even be election interference. It should be stealing an election trial. Or maybe you can come up with a better phrase for it. Because one of the pieces that I should write, one of the op-eds that I should write this week for Hartmann Report is about how inappropriate or how just wrong it is that Sean, can you close that, please? How absolutely wrong it is that this story is that this trial is being characterized as one thing when actually it's something completely different. I mean, this is just wrong. So anyhow, Stormy Daniels today was testifying. She says first of all, she says, when I opened the door to come out of the bathroom, she had to go to the bathroom. She comes out of the bathroom, and up to this point, Trump has been wearing silk pajamas, right? But which was weird to begin with. She was supposed to meet him for dinner. So, you know, he invites her up to his room instead of meeting her for dinner. She comes up to his room. He's sitting there in pajamas, or he answers the door in pajamas. They have this long conversation. She goes into the bathroom to use the toilet because she's drank a couple of glasses of water, a couple of bottles of water. When she comes out of the bathroom, is sitting on the bed in his boxer shorts. Like, you know, hey, what does she expect? She tries to walk out of the room, and Trump jumps up and blocks her from leaving the bedroom and pushes her onto the bed. She says it's not threatening, right? She says, great, I put myself in a bad situation. And then she says, I went to the opposite side of the bed. I had my clothes and shoes off, missionary position. The attorney says, did you end up having sex with him? Then she says, she remembers sitting at the end of the bed. She says afterwards, she says, it was really hard to get my shoes on because my hands were shaking so hard. I left as fast as I could. That was it. And he says, did you tell anybody about it? And she says, no, I was ashamed. Yeah. This is incredible. And this was, you know, keep in mind, this was just a couple of months after Melania had given birth to Barron. So that's happening. Judge Eileen Cannon, down in Florida, speaking of Donald Trump's legal woes, has given Trump an indefinite delay in his trial. There's a whole evidentiary thing, and she's just said, you know, whenever you guys get around to posting this information, that's fine with me. So, you know, they'll get around for, you know, forever. This adds more unknowns to the case. She has not yet even selected a trial date. And this time-eating strategy, of course, is Trump's strategy. We're also learning that Eileen Cannon, the judge in the case down in Florida, took a $10,000 bribe, basically. The George Mason University has been sending federal judges on these, you know, $10,000 all expenses paid, first-class airfare, $1,000 a night resort in Montana near Yellowstone National Lodge. Lucian Trescott for salon rights. It's called the Sage Lodge in Prey, Montana. It's where George Mason University sends gaggles of federal judges every year or so, all paid for by the Antonin Scalia Law School, named for the late justice, who ironically died on a ranch getaway paid for by right-wing benefactors. This is not something new, these bribes to these judges. But she failed. You're supposed to, you know, when somebody tries to bribe you, you're supposed to disclose it. Or when somebody gives you a gift, let's say, you're supposed to disclose it. And she was a guest at these conferences both in 2021 and in 2022, and she never filed the so-called privately funded seminar disclosure report. And it's supposed to be posted within 30 days of taking the gift. And Cannon somehow forgot to do so. Right. Why has Israel? Israel is now moved into Rafah. This is concerning, and I think that the whole, you know, should protesters be peaceful is actually a big issue, and we'll get to that in just a second. But the U.S. has made it clear. This is by Jason Burke over at The Guardian. The U.S. has made clear its opposition to any broader assault into this city, into Rafah, which is this city on the very southern edge of Gaza, right on the Egyptian border, where all these refugees have been pushed. But this operation signals continuing determination from the Israeli government to keep fighting Hamas, thus increasing their leverage during ceasefire negotiations. The Rafah crossing has been closed, which means that no more aid into Rafah, no more evacuation of patients from the collapsed healthcare system. He notes that this is a death sentence against the people of Gaza, particularly the ill or injured. The only other crossing point in the south, Karim Shalom, has also been closed. That was closed after a Hamas rocket attack, which I think you could argue was understandable. Al Jazeera has published a draft of the peace proposal that came out of Qatar and Egypt. And it would basically be a prisoner swap and a 42-day ceasefire with 2 possible 42-day extensions. Israel lifting the aid restrictions. But Israel has not accepted it. And the reason why, I think, is fairly straightforward. The right-wingers in Netanyahu's coalition have made it clear that if he goes along with any kind of a ceasefire before Hamas is completely destroyed, they will quit. And if they quit, that will immediately throw Israel into elections. And if Israel goes into elections, Netanyahu will no longer be prime minister, and his trial for corruption and bribery will begin. And he may well end up in prison, because it looks like the case against him is pretty solid. So don't expect any moments of peace here in that area. Which brings us to the protests. In fact, actually, I want to get into the protests in just a minute, in some more detail. How far should protesters go in the United States who are calling for, the end of the slaughter of Gazan civilians, basically, and for that matter, and protesters who are saying, we need the end of Hamas as well. And protesting the horrors that Hamas has inflicted on Israel. I mean, there's 2 sides to this. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
16 minutes past the hour. It's Talk Media for the sane among us. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Adam in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Adam, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hello. I was calling about your comment about protesters in the U.S.
Right.
And I just wanted to say that, first of all, the incident in UCLA where you had Jewish protesters attack the encampment was just a microcosm of Palestine itself. Well,
we don't know for sure that it was Jews who were attacking them. They're trying to figure that out right now. There's some speculation that it was Proud Boy types.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about that is no one's been arrested, and it doesn't seem like there's any type of investigation. But
actually, there is, Adam. The UCLA Police Department is actively soliciting photos. They have asked for the cooperation of the Los Angeles Police and the FBI. And they're trying to identify the people who came in and beat up the protesters, because that was a brutal attack. It was an absolutely brutal attack. In fact, the chancellor of the university came out yesterday and said, we're going to find these people and prosecute them.
Well, there's one guy named Eli. I can't remember his last name, but he's making the rounds on TV, and he's saying he knows the people who made the attacks, and he hasn't been even spoken to. But what I was going to say is it's symbolic of what's actually happened in Palestine. You had people occupying a quad, and then in the middle of the night, people with Israeli flags attacked the people in the quad. And then after the police and security, there's video of that showing them do nothing and just watching these people get attacked and have fireworks thrown at them.
You're talking about at UCLA? Actually, there were no police there. That was the problem. For 3 hours, there were no police there.
They showed up after. Private security was there. They're on video, but they showed up after a long time. But the point is after the attack, these people who made the attack claimed that they're victims, and then they don't get arrested. And then the people who were attacked were the ones who eventually got arrested. And it's just berserk. But what I was going to say is, from my understanding, most of these people who are protesting in favor of Palestine, they have been peaceful, and there have been false accusations. I think there's this one Jewish girl who claimed that she was poked in the eye by a flag, and there's video showing that that was a lie. And I don't like the premise of your question, because I think most of the people who've been protesting have been peaceful, and they've set up their own medic camps. A lot of them are Jewish, and they've even helped the fellow Jewish protesters in Passover ceremonies and other types of items. Yeah.
You're right. The premise of my question, well, actually my question, which I really haven't developed yet, and I will in a minute, is it appropriate for protesters to go farther than simply marching down the street? In other words, is it appropriate to occupy buildings and to shut down universities? I believe it is. And I believe that's in the tradition. I mean, you know, when they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they shut down the bridge.
Right. So what's strange about your whole scenario is all the vitriol that's going against the Palestinian protesters. But looking back on it in previous years, Colombia even has like memorials to the people who occupied Colombia in 1968.
I know. I agree.
Yeah.
You know, when I got arrested at MSU along with 12 other people, there were riots for 4 days. They shut down the university and occupied one of the buildings. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, you know, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. You know, Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "22 minutes past the hour." So I wanted to talk about protest for a minute. We've talked about this on and off for a while. I am of the opinion. I'm kind of torn on this because I see both sides of this. Many people are saying, okay, protests are fine, but don't occupy buildings, don't occupy the quad or the green or whatever it's called on the various campuses. Others are saying, yeah, of course you should occupy these things. I mean, that's the finest tradition of protest. Absolutely, you should be occupying these things. And, I get both sides. I completely do. I do think, however, that the simple reality, is that the protest movements that have disrupted things, that have been inconvenient for people. Now, I'm not talking about hurting people. I'm not talking about, injuring people, killing people, beating people up. I'm not talking about like January 6th, which was violent protest. I'm talking about nonviolent but disruptive protest, which in my opinion is all we have seen so far in the they're being referred to as pro-Palestinian. I would say anti-war protests or anti-slaughter protests or whatever you want to call it, has been happening. And when you look back, I mean, John Lewis called it good trouble. They occupied, as it were, they took over the Edmund Pettus Bridge when they marched across it. They shut down the bridge. And that was, in fact, that was the rationale that the police used to beat them and turn dogs on them. But we've got to balance the right to protest on the one hand and the right to safety on the other hand. But I'm not convinced or even slightly convinced that the right to safety has been substantially violated anywhere, even at Columbia University. Michael Moore talks about this in his Rumble podcast. He says, he says, you have to take over the buildings. That's not violence. I hope it continues. I applaud every student who has taken a stand at their campus, graduation, whatever. This is the purpose of democracy. And he blasted Eric Adams. He says, there's a misconception that we're disrupting. That's the point. We're here to disrupt. This is one of the protesters who said this. Like, thank you for saying we're disrupting, because that's the truth. We're here to disrupt your daily lives. We're here to show you the urgency. Michael Moore pointed out to Joe Biden, he says to Joe Biden, you're going to lose to Donald Trump if you don't change your Israel policy. And he points to the Michigan Democratic primary where Michael Moore had asked people in Michigan who were concerned about Biden's Israel policy to vote in the primary, but not to vote for Biden, to vote uncommitted. And 100,000 people did in Michigan, which is a huge warning. And he ends by saying, if you haven't started in a campaign at your college, do it. Meanwhile, at UCLA, the chancellor of the university and the police department, this is I think, a really good point, a really good sign. It took 3 hours for the cops to show up when these, you had the protesters who were there, and then these pro-Israel protesters, I guess you could call them, who, apparently it was, some pro-Israel people and some just, Proud Boy types, just let's have a riot types. And it was extraordinarily violent. Now, the violence wasn't coming from the pro-Palestinian people. The violence was coming from the pro-Israel people. And so the chancellor of the university, Mr. Block, Gene Block, has come out and said that the school is going to track these people down. He says, we will prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. And we have also connected with the FBI about possible assistance. He's also reached out to the Los Angeles Police Department asking for help identifying these people. They're turning over campus security. They're looking at vehicles that might have been in the area. They're looking at license plate readers near the campus. A lot of these protesters are seriously pissed off that the cops took so long to show up. And I'm with them. I completely understand. So we'll see where this goes, but it's a mess. But your right to protest needs to be protected. Our right to protest. It absolutely must be protected. On the other side of the break, Christie Noem was bragging about shooting her puppy in another book? Seriously? And your calls. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And Stormy Daniels says that she met Trump a couple of times later, and he kept trying to get into bed with her. Bizarre. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Tyranny, From Plato to Trump, Fools, Sycophants, and Citizens by Andrew Fiala. This is from the preface. It starts out with a quote from Mary Wollstonecraft from her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Quote, tyrants would have cause to tremble if reason were to become the rule of duty. We recently witnessed the failure of a would-be tyrant who attempted to subvert the rule of law and overturn the result of a democratic election. The American system was pushed toward a cliff, but constitutional guardrails slowed things down. Conscientious people pumped the brakes, and the system held. This was a lesson of tyranny averted. We should take stock and learn what worked and what needs improvement in our system and in our souls. And while the American crisis of 2020-2021 was frightening, a broader historical perspective helps. The threat of tyranny is common, but the cure is well known. It involves virtuous citizenship and a stable constitution. The tyrant's rise and fall is an old story. Consider, a plague descended on the nation as the tyrant ranted and raved, refusing to admit that he was the cause of the nation's ills. The tyrant lived in a fantasy world of his own creation. He refused to accept what was said by those who spoke truth to power. Instead, he listened only to those who flattered his ego and encouraged him in his delusions. The nation suffered profoundly under the tyrant and his plague. He tried to blame the plague on some other scapegoat. Members of the public were seduced by the tyrant and his sycophants to sacrifice everything on behalf of a lie. Violence erupted. When the awful truth was finally revealed, the chorus reached a tragic conclusion. Our lives were mere shadows, and then there's a block of poetry here. Our lives were mere shadows, happiness fades away to nothing. The tyrant's fall reminds us that no human creation lasts forever. Plague and trouble make victims of us all. This is from Oedipus, the Tyrant, lines 1190. This is the story of Oedipus. It is also the story of Donald Trump. The players in this tragedy are found throughout history. They are the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic masses. The tyrant rages, the sycophants simper, the masses cheer and howl, fight and die. As the plague spreads, good things fall apart and decency suffers. This tragedy brings with it the risk of despair. The good news is that the cure for this disease is well known. It is, as Mary Wollstonecraft suggested, reason. Life in general must be made reasonable. This means we need a reasonable constitution as well as wise and virtuous citizens. Wisdom and virtue work together to prevent tyranny. Plato and Aristotle knew this, as did John Adams. Adams wrote in his diary when he was Vice President of the United States, quote, "Tyranny can scarcely be practiced upon a virtuous and wise people." But wisdom, virtue, and reason are often lacking. Wollstonecraft, I've got my Marys wrong. This is Wollstonecraft, I'm sorry. Wollstonecraft laments the fact that, quote, "tyranny in whatever part of society it rears its brazen front will ever undermine morality." Tyranny is not only a political problem, it is also a moral and spiritual one. It afflicts our souls as well as churches, businesses, and family life. Wollstonecraft's important contribution was to argue that for the liberation of women in an era when women were oppressed by the tyranny of patriarchal families. Wollstonecraft was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson and other thinkers of the 18th century Enlightenment. Despite their claims to enlightenment, the heroes of this tradition suffered from moral blindness, as we all do. Jefferson's words inspired a revolution against the tyrant King George III. The words inscribed in the Jefferson Memorial state, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." But Jefferson owned slaves, one of the more obvious forms of tyranny in the world. We must all be careful of our blind spots. Reason aims to shed light by holding up a mirror. The remedy for tyranny is philosophical self-examination. This is an ongoing process, not a panacea. Each generation must seek to make progress on their path to enlightenment. The good news is that we have made progress. Women were liberated and slavery was abolished. The idea that wisdom and virtue can cure tyranny predates the Enlightenment by over 2,000 years. It was the solution proposed by the ancient Greeks, who gave us the very language we will employ here. Words such as tyranny, sycophancy, democracy, and political philosophy. The Greeks emphasized the need for virtue among the players in the political drama. Modern thinkers built upon this and emphasized the need for a rational system of government that prevents tyranny. Tragedy is avoided when leaders and citizens are virtuous and when a stable constitutional system guarantees individual rights, divides power, and creates checks and balances. We have known the cure for thousands of years, but the disease is genetic. Every generation or so, the conditions conspire to bring together an ugly cast of characters that includes the tyrant, his sycophants, and the moronic fools who cheer him on. The book, Tyranny from Plato to Trump, by Andrew Fiala. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. All righty. Welcome back. Stormy Daniels still testified. The cross-examination has not yet begun. But she's talking about subsequent meetings with Donald Trump. She met him periodically, and every single time he was trying to hustle her. Now, keep in mind, Trump has claimed that he didn't even know her, that he never met her, that it was all a lie, that she's trying to blackmail him, quack, quack, quack. And in fact, his lawyers had basically made that case that he just met her at the gift shop and, had her picture taken and that was it. His lawyers made that case in their opening arguments. So the jury has to be thinking, well, this is interesting. Meanwhile, Christie Noem has a new theory. She says, actually, it was Eric Bolling trying to help her out. He had her on his program, and he says, here's my question. The editor, was she possibly a liberal plant? Because I'm not sure either of these stories, the dog story, the North Korea story, seems like the Christie Noem I know. And she has to say, no, I actually, put that stuff in there. And, goes on to say that I hated that dog. Yeah, liberal plants, amazing. All right, so what's on your mind here today? David in San Francisco. Hey, David, what's up? Sean, I need you to pot up the phone system. Hang on just a second, David.
Sure.
There you go. Okay, David, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yeah, a little earlier in the hour, you were asking for another way to describe the Trump trials. And the one that's going on specifically with Stormy Daniels is state, right? New York State.
Correct.
Or is it one of the boroughs even?
No, it's a state trial.
And so,
well, it's happening
right.
in Manhattan. Well, I don't know. Is Judge Merchan a Manhattan judge or a New York State judge? I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Well, in any case, it's more local. And if I understand right, it's basically tax fraud. And on the very first day, I've only seen this twice mentioned in Midas Touch videos, where they describe that the $130,000 going toward Stormy, and then an additional $30,000 for Michael Cohen. That then Trump doubled that and even added more, so that it came to about $420,000, which is what he wrote off on his taxes as business expense. Mm-hmm. So it's a fraud case. It's tax fraud.
Right.
And so the way I've been laying it out on a lot of the radio shows, that it's basically he tricked America into paying for his mistress.
That's a good way of putting it. Because our tax dollars, when Trump doesn't pay taxes, you and I have to. That's a good one. I do think, though, that the big issue here, David, that the media just does not want to talk about, is that had Trump not paid off these two women for their silence, he would not have become president. And that is a big deal.
Yeah, that's probably true. By the way, Ken Paxton down in Texas, I understand he was in the audience the other day, and I think he was up on 17 different impeachment charges earlier in the year, and one of them was doing exactly the same thing. That when he had a sexual harassment case, he tried to get the citizens of Texas to pay for the penalty. Right. He got found guilty in it, and so he tried to trick the legislature into giving him, passing the buck on to the taxpayers of Texas. So again, paying for him, in this case, it wasn't a mistress because it was more of a harassment, but it was still, sexual malfeasance, let's say, and getting the taxpayers to pay for it instead of the guilty party.
Yeah, totally get it. David, thank you. That's a great point. Diane in Ann Arbor. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello, Tom. I would like to credit you for having the backbone to say Christie Noem shot her dog in the face. I understand that's gruesome. I understand that a lot of people wouldn't want to hear it, but I'm sorry, it's a fact, and it shows her personality and her.
Well, we don't know that it's a fact. She didn't describe what part of the dog she shot. But if you want to kill an animal, the fastest way to do it is to shoot him in the head.
But not in the face. I mean,
and probably the dog was looking at her because it was her dog.
Yeah, but there's a way to do it quick, and the military knows. And my husband was in the military. When my father had to put his dog down, he told him how to do it quickly. Yeah, and it's in the back of the head. Yeah. But anyway, aside from all of that, I'm just saying and then when you said that, I thought, boy, I hope I gave him the fact, because I had mentioned that to you. Maybe you heard it somewhere before. And I thought, did you do a fact check app? And I went back and I found that on Instagram, Lincoln Project, man's best friend. And it said, twice he said, if you, shooting the dog in the face, did you really have to do that? And the Lincoln Project is full of lawyers. None of them would have put that in there if it wasn't.
Well, I'm guessing that their bet is that Christie Noem isn't going to come out and say, no, I didn't shoot him in the face, I shot him in the chest, or something like that, because that'll just make it even worse. So, but who knows? Well, who knows?
Yeah. Well, and then they said their final word is, did you have to put that in your book for political gain? I mean, that was the cheap shot of the whole thing. Yeah. You had to use something. Really is. And I'm thinking, in the end, the revenge to her, Cricket's revenge to her, is that her daughter had to live with the mother who shot her pet, and then brags about it later. The woman's probably, about 25 years old now, the daughter, who, asked for her pet Cricket. Mm-hmm. Well, it was 20 years ago, and I'm assuming she's at least was 5 or whatever, coming home from school. But I'm just saying, she has to look at her mother and see all this going around, and that dredges up feelings. I bet. Yeah. But one question to you about Israel is this true? After the war, we'll say 1945, the Jews were given land in that area. And then in 1948, 3 years later, they started a war with Palestine. 3 years later?
I don't know I am not a student or scholar of that time or that area.
But roughly is that? Why would they go to war for land when they've been given land, and then they go to war with the neighboring, whoever?
Yeah, I just
3 years later.
Diane, I'm sorry, I don't know if that's even true, and if it is, I don't know what what the circumstances were.
Well, it's the 1948 war, the war of 1948, right?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at it. Diane, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Rick in Lexington, Kentucky. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, Mr. Harmon. I'm a little bit frustrated, and I'm gonna try my best not to take it out on you.
Thank you.
But in all the cable shows, the networks, it's already started. It's May, and we're talking about the election to come. And I'm starting to get the same mojo about, okay, the black community and the black vote is starting to drift Republican and toward Trump. Okay, and I have a problem with that, because the bottom line is that in 20, the black vote was 90% Democratic. Right. And if it does drift, let's say it does drift to 80%, okay, so what? 80% of the people, black people in America that vote, are going to vote Democratic, are going to vote for America. 60% of the brown people, 65% of the brown people are going to vote Democratic for America. White people is the only group of people, and I say white people having nothing to do with race, only to identify a group of people, are the only people in 20 that 65% of white men in this country voted for Trump and Republicans, and 55% of women, white women, did likewise. Yep. Okay. So the conversation starting off talking about black people, like that's going to dictate what's going to happen and who's going to be president.
Well, it might. Joe Biden won by only 80,000 votes in 4 states.
Okay, well, let me make my point.
Okay.
What I'm saying to you is that it might. I understand that. Right. But when are we going to start the conversation with the 60% of white, 65% of white men, and the 55% of white women who vote Republican and have voted Republican since 1965?
Right. And what the hell is wrong with these people?
Well, okay.
If I may add.
Your comment. What I want, Tom, and I've talked to you several times about this, the only thing that I want This is America. You can do what you want to. You can vote for who you want to. You can have the beliefs you want to. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is the people that have the public forums to talk to us, never bringing this up, never holding these groups of people accountable.
Right.
And how do you start with the black vote?
Yeah, it's kind of a blaming thing, in other words. It's like, well, let's blame the black people rather than blaming the white people for voting for Trump.
The black people didn't do what they were supposed to do, and all of a sudden we flip 8 points, and that's the end of the world.
Yeah,
blame it on the black people.
Yeah.
Okay. Now my other quick point to you. I talked to you about 8 months ago, and this is what I'm saying. I'm not trying to hold you accountable. I'm just going to tell you what I heard. About 8 months I talked to you. We were carrying on a similar conversation. We ended our conversation maybe 5 callers later. You made a comment because the conversation continued on, and other people made comments about what we were talking about, which was basically the same thing we're talking about now, black or white or what's going on in the country. And you made a comment that, off the top of your head, you said, I really have to say this, that my friends and my family, we really don't talk about black people. We really don't talk about brown people in our day-to-day conversation. And so I took that to think of. I took that to say, okay, we always have these fights about white privilege, and I don't get me wrong, I don't hold you responsible for that. I mean, why should you? But the point is that white people in this country, as far as privilege, they always want to say, "Hey, I'm not getting anything special. What is my privilege?"
Yeah.
The point that you have the freedom in your day-to-day life not to think about black people or not to think about brown people, and 85% of the people that's black and brown in this country think about white people every day.
I know. I've made that point many times, Rick. That's the essence of white privilege, and I believe that was the point I was trying to make, although I don't recall a conversation from 8 months ago. But oppressors have the luxury of not having to think about the oppressed. The oppressed do not have that luxury. And that, regardless of whether it's black, white, or Palestinian, Israeli, or, pick your oppressors and oppressed.
So do you think 1 time a week, 2 times a week, somebody on some of these shows should quit talking about Republicans and conservatives and evangelicals and let's talk about white people? Yeah. Good idea. That's all I ask. I have no problem, with white people per se. There's no emphasis in my life one way or the other. The only thing is that I know I have to deal within that society every day. Yeah.
No, I get it.
Thank you, man.
I get it, Rick. Thank you. Thank you very much. 47 minutes, almost 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's Talk Media for the sane among us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with your calls in just a second. Stay with us. And welcome back. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Well, let me tell you a not so significant but anecdotal fact. My high school graduation was at Royce Hall at UCLA because I graduated from high school from a school that was a prep school for UCLA. I did not attend UCLA, but kind of interesting to see what's going on there all these years later. I do want to share with you something that, because of our relationship, I feel I can. There are a few things in my life, and I've just entered my 60s, Tom.
Happy birthday.
That have affected me. That have affected me, like what is going on, and you call it you can call it Gaza, Israel, Palestine. I mean, even that is politically charged, what you call the region. You may recall there was a train wreck in a place called Palestine, Ohio, a couple of years ago, I think it was, or maybe less than that. And it was really interesting to me to see the media call it Palestine. And even though it's spelled like Palestine.
Right, but that's how the people in the city pronounce it.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
That's my whole point. That's my whole point.
Well, I know some people. It's typically a Jewish name, but I know some people whose last names end with Stine, who pronounce their names like Silberstein or Silberstein.
Or Silberstein, yes.
So it's either pronunciation is okay.
No, all I'm getting at is that it's just very disturbing what is happening for some unconventional reasons for me, particularly the fact that almost 500,000 people have died in Yemen as a result of the war that the United States is very much involved in, that the Saudis are carrying out, and there are no protests there. But I'm getting off the beaten path. I just wanted to say that anecdotally. I wanted to talk about your question today in the Hartmann Report. Not the Hartmann Report, but in your program today about when is protest and peaceful protest. And all I wanted to say, and I'm going to be as oblique as I can, I believe that charity begins at home. And I think that if the United States really believes in peace and peaceful protest, and that is the way to get things done, I think it should exhibit more of that around the world and at home. You talked about the Pettus Bridge and the protests during the civil rights era, which I was just being born at that point in time. What with that peaceful protest was met with violence.
Yep.
And I've got to tell you, I'm not advocating violence, because that's one thing that Europeans will always say to a black man. Well, you're not saying be violent. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I often wonder, what if black people had fought back as opposed to getting their heads bashed in? Now, of course, the European will say to me, well, we would have killed you all. Well, that's kind of the point. I think at some point, and I'm not being critical so much as I am being, thoughtful. At some point, if we really believe in peace, we need to exhibit more of it around the world as a country. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well said. I agree. I absolutely agree. And your point about Yemen, I mean, we did actually a couple of programs on that, but you're right. There was never any large protest movement. And, it's because it was, I guess, a proxy war, Saudi Arabia. Kenyatta, always nice to hear from you, and keep up the great work on Substack. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically, just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 54 minutes past the hour. Marty in Worth, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Sure. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, we were talking about the campus protesters earlier. I was following a local story at U of C. They started on the local news, started covering this at like early in the morning. They cleared out the encampment that was set up there, and it was a pretty tense moment. The cops had barricaded the protesters, and they had distributed flyers saying anybody still sticking around is subject to arrest, may face expulsion. And then, so the news journalists, they were like kind of like hanging around there, and like everybody was telling each other, if you're not prepared to get arrested, then you should leave right now. And they stood their ground, and while the police cleared out all the tents and stuff like that, and it looked like for a second there they were going to arrest all of these people, but then they lifted up the barricades and all the police backed off, and they just left the protesters alone. And as far as I know, there were no arrests that were made, and no police. There was no
I might have missed something at the very beginning. Where are we talking about, Barney?
Chicago, University of Chicago.
University of Chicago. Thank you. I'm sorry I missed that.
UFC in Chicago. Yeah, no, my bad. Yeah, no, it was an interesting development to kind of watch in real time.
Yeah.
And then after they had cleared out all of the tents and all the other stuff, then they just backed off and left them alone, as far as I know, and they were allowed to regather at the quad. And
well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was
respecting our right to protest is essential. I mean, it's written into the First Amendment. There's the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances shall not be abridged. I mean, that's pretty unambiguous, and it's
right. And some of these people protesting, they had family that were killed in Gaza. They were interviewing some other people. So I mean, this is real. I mean, this is like people. This has really touched a nerve, and I don't think inherently, none of the protesters there seemed like agitators, and it seemed like that was if there was going to be any kind of like clearing out or whatever. I mean, UFC I think did it right. I mean, because as far as I know, there wasn't any there wasn't any arrests made. Nobody was detained, and everybody was just left alone. So
I'm glad to hear that. Artie, thank you for the report from Chicago. Do appreciate it. Thank you so much. We're hitting the top of the hour here. I'll be back with you on the other side of the break. Are billionaires simply money addicts? It's you and me all 3 hours, no guests today. Are billionaires simply money addicts like Scrooge McDuck? Is that the problem America has right now? An addiction problem? We'll talk about that on the other side of the break, and I'll be picking up your calls as well. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1 hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3 hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from America's Battle for Media Democracy, the Triumph of Corporate Libertarianism and the Future of Media Reform by Victor Pickard. This is from the chapter number 4, page 98. It's titled The Origins of the Fairness Doctrine. Barely a year had passed since the Blue Book controversy when similar conflicts over public interest regulation re-emerged. This round of contentious debates centered on whether to repeal the Mayflower Doctrine, which prohibited broadcasters from editorializing politically. Broadcasters' growing political power emboldened them to challenge the Larry Fly-era FCC decision, which would spark the last major radio reform battle of the 1940s. Fearing a further commercialized, conservative-biased, corporate-dominated medium should broadcasters gain the right to editorialize, many progressives saw at stake, as one news article put it, the future of radio as an instrument of service to the people. Reformers marshaled considerable support from the still intact coalition from the Blue Book debates to rally for the Mayflower decision's preservation. Similar to those debates, broadcasters attacked the reformers' position with First Amendment rights arguments that aimed to delegitimize the FCC's regulatory power over broadcast programming. This episode involved a number of ironies. Most notably, the controversial rule that later became known as the Fairness Doctrine, which to this day is often invoked by progressives as the high watermark of enlightened media policy, actually came about as a kind of consolation prize for post-war liberals who had advocated stricter regulation. The following chapter recovers this forgotten history. In doing so, it lays bare a number of early tensions and contradictions that closed out a decade of contentious policy debates around normative understandings of media's democratic role. This history throws into sharp relief several significant parallels and connections to 21st century media challenges, particularly around the question of whether government has any affirmative regulatory authority over media. Toward the end of the 1940s, progressive forces were in disarray. The remains of the Popular Front, including many New Deal liberals, were largely disintegrated, especially after the Progressive Party's disastrous loss in the 1948 election. What had been a rising social democratic challenge was now widely seen as dangerously socialistic, even in its diminished state. With a communist witch hunt in full swing, the broadcast industry exploited Cold War politics to discredit reformers by claiming that the reformers' real agenda was to destroy free radio. J. Edgar Hoover harassed the FCC on a regular basis with letters and unsolicited reports on subversive broadcasters. And the FCC's actions were aggressively scrutinized as Congress and the FBI put the Commission on notice for a number of unofficial investigations. Writing to Larry Fly, this is the FCC commissioner, about the endless red baiting, Clifford Durr confided, "When I read of the present plans to protect the country against the dangerous thinking of us bureaucrats, I'm inclined to look back with nostalgia on the days when the Commission stood more or less firmly against our friend J. Edgar." By the late 1940s, the FCC's more progressive wing, aside from Durr, had become more passive on issues related to regulatory oversight of broadcasting programming. The tide clearly had turned in the favor of the commercial broadcasters. Rendering the landscape even less hospitable for media reform, the industry attacks against the FCC coincided with an increasingly right-wing tilt in D.C. politics. Even before the 1948 presidential election, liberals were in various states of retreat. FDR had died, the New Deal agenda lay in tatters, and Republicans were coming off a congressional sweep in the 1946 midterm elections. The Democrats would regain some ground electorally by taking back Congress in '48, but the ideological shift was more permanent. During his campaign, President Truman characterized 1948 as the decisive year of the challenge, with a primary choice between, quote, between a parcel labeled progressive liberalism and a parcel labeled reactionary conservatism, end quote. However, Truman's liberalism often proved to be largely rhetorical. After he eked out a victory in a four-way race, his administration quickly shied away from the previous administration's aggressive liberalism, ever mindful of Southern conservative Democrats and Republicans nipping at their flanks. Truman's market-friendly orientation led him to espouse commercial broadcasters' policy positions. Invoking his support for the, quote, American system, end quote, of broadcasting, he insisted in an open letter to Broadcasting Magazine's Sol Taishoff that, quote, America, as the birthplace of radio, should have a free, competitive system, unfettered by artificial barriers and regulated only as to the laws of nature and the limitation of facilities, end quote. Deferring to the laws of the market, Truman ordered, is, quote, preferred over rigid government regulation of a medium that by its very nature must be maintained as free as the press, end quote. The same issue of broadcasting contained an editorial amplifying Truman's message to the FCC that regulation was to be off the table. A similar statement followed 10 months later with broadcasting triumphantly announcing that Truman, quote, emphatically reaffirmed his belief in completely free radio, end quote, which according to the editors translated into, quote, a declaration on behalf of a broadcasting system unshackled by un-American regulations, end quote. It's amazing. America's battle for media democracy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. Stormy Daniels is on, the entire courtroom is on break right now. They just went to lunch, so they'll be gone for an hour or so. And she most recently testified that Trump told her that he and Melania sleep in separate rooms. She basically had asked him, something to the effect of, this is absolutely not, any kind of verbatim transcript. I'm getting this secondhand, and I'm relaying it to you third hand. So take the word for word of it with a huge grain of salt. But basically, she said, "Why do you want to have sex with me? You've got a beautiful wife." And he said, "Don't worry about that. We sleep in separate rooms." In other words, I'm not getting sex from Melania, so I'm going to get it from you. What wasn't brought up, apparently, and apparently because the judge had earlier ruled that it can't be brought up, is that Melania had recently given birth to Barron, his youngest child, who Donald Trump, by the way, got time to. For the judge said, "We'll skip an entire day of court proceedings so that you can go to your son's graduation." So Trump has now scheduled a rally in Minnesota for that day. I'm guessing that he'll do both. I mean, he's got his own private jet. He can schedule them. He can schedule around it. But I'm wondering how the judge is thinking of that. And then the other piece of testimony that drew a chuckle apparently from the witnesses was where she said that she got tired of him cutting her off and interrupting her and just basically acting like he was, God or something. And so she, my phrase, not hers. And so she said, you need a spanking. And she rolled up this magazine with his picture on the cover that he had shown her, and spanked him with it. And that's got to be weird, right? That's just got to be weird. Anyway, the piece I wrote today for HartmannReport.com, and it's also posted over on DailyKos.com. Wealth junkies are ruining America. What can we do about it? Or my headline was, "Are billionaires simply money addicts like Scrooge McDuck?" And the point that I'm making, we've got all these Republicans who are just going out of their way to screw working class people. In Ohio, there's a ballot measure to the minimum wage in Ohio is $10.54 or 45 cents an hour. There's a ballot measure that people are trying to get on the ballot in Ohio. They need 400,000+ signatures, and it would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour over a 2-year period. The Republicans have come out and said, and that would include tipped workers, by the way. So the Republicans have come out with their own version, which was, it turns out, written by the restaurant industry, that says that, we'll raise the minimum wage to $15, but it's going to take 4 years, and it doesn't include tipped workers. Tipped workers only go to $7.50 an hour. Bernie Moreno, the Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate against Sherrod Brown in Ohio, was recently forced by a court to pay $400,000 in wages that he had stolen. I mean, he was literally convicted of wage theft, stolen from employees at his used car business. And he says he doesn't think there should be any minimum wage at all. In Florida, Ron DeSantis just signed a bill into law, a Republican bill that forbids cities in the state from mandating that employers provide outdoor workers with heat protections, including water. Again, the legislation written by agricultural industry lobbyists. It also scales back child labor protections and forbids cities from instituting their own safeguards for children in the workplace. In Iowa, a Republican majority wiped out public employees' right to collectively bargain. It was signed by that state's Republican governor with a new twist, mimicking a rule that DeSantis put into place in Florida, making it illegal for the state to automatically deduct union dues, from state workers' paychecks. These efforts are just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. Anti-worker legislation, tax cuts, I mean, all this stuff is just happening all over the country, which raises the question, why? Is it that Republicans just hate working class people? Is it they think that working class people just aren't worthy and therefore, it's okay to just exploit them? I think, if you look at what's going on, basically the billionaires in America, or the majority of the billionaires in America, own the GOP. And the businesses in America own the GOP. Republican politicians, basically this is the deal they made. The Democratic Party has been the party of labor since the 1930s. When Franklin Roosevelt legalized unions in 1933 with the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act. And have been ever since. And as Harry Truman famously said, the Republican Party is the party of wealth and privilege, always has been and always will be. Well, it hasn't always been. There was about a 15-year period there when they were actually the party of bringing together white and black people. This was the party of Abraham Lincoln. That all went to hell in 1876 when Sam Tilden was elected president, or was given the presidency by Congress, actually. Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president. Sam Tilden actually won that election, but Hayes became, the Republican Hayes, the Democrat Tilden, the Republican Hayes became president because of that deal to stab black people in the back, to end Reconstruction in 1876. Since 1876, the GOP has been the party of big business and billionaires, right straight through. So what's going on here? Well, science shows that acquiring wealth stimulates the pleasure and reward circuits in the brain's ventromedial prefrontal cortex, just behind the eyes, that part of the brain. Studies that map blood flow and electrical activity show that even anticipating money lights up this region, which is the same response that you get to anticipating sex or anticipating food. So, I remember this was, I think 2 years ago, a woman called into the program. I was talking about wealth at the time, and she called in and she said that she had always been kind of a paycheck to paycheck person, but she had had a recent life circumstance that meant that she was no longer financially insecure. I don't recall what it was. I think she might have gotten an inheritance. But now she has more money than she needs, and she said, and I find myself checking my bank balance every day. I never did that before. And it's like this kind of Scrooge McDuck phenomena. She seemed troubled by this, and probably because Jesus was pretty explicit. He said, the rich man came to Jesus and said, "What do I do to get into heaven?" And he said, "Sell everything you own and give the money to the poor, and then you can join me in heaven." And the guy said, "Screw that." So, not exactly a billionaire or CEO's mantra, right? So, what I'm arguing is that the morbidly rich in our country are constantly seeking this dopamine rush that you get from adding another $1 million or another $1 billion to your checking account. And that they're willing to destroy American democracy, and they're willing to destroy the American middle class in order to get that dopamine rush. Now, we have a word for this. When people use heroin, for example, or cocaine or methamphetamine, they very often end up destroying their own families because they're just, or alcohol. Alcohol is another one. These people are addicts. And dopamine is the indirect drug. All of these drugs produce dopamine rushes. And It's an addiction. And now that 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court have legalized political bribery, these billionaires have just been reaching out to the Republicans and saying, make us richer, make us richer, make us richer, and we'll keep you in power. So what do we do about this? Well, from the 1930s to the 1980s, we used a top income tax bracket of between 74 and 90% to keep the wealth junkies from damaging the rest of us. It was sort of like giving a heroin addict methadone. You can have money, you can be rich, but you can't have so much money that you can blast yourself into outer space on penis-shaped rockets and buy, multiple 500-foot yachts. You can be rich, you can be really rich, but not, over-the-top rich. And, of course, Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush and Donald Trump did away with those things, and that's why we're $35 trillion in debt, was because of these 3 tax breaks, or tax cuts. So what I'm saying is, if we want to stop the damage that these wealth addicts are doing to America, the way that we need to do that is by bringing back that top 74% income tax bracket on money earned over $5 million a year, and reverse Citizens United, end legal bribery of politicians in America. I think it's pretty straightforward stuff. We have, the Reagan administration and the Reagan Revolution and the Supreme Court, following on from that, basically gave billionaires the power to have all the junk they want, right? And I mean, like junkies, right? It's like saying to a heroin addict, here's a kilo of heroin, enough to last your lifetime. Have fun. This is what the Supreme Court did, and we need to reverse it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So I'll be back with your calls, and I want to talk about the new propaganda war too, Ann Applebaum's amazing piece in the Atlantic, and then I'll pick up your calls. Stay with us. And welcome back, MJ in Seattle. Hey, MJ, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I have, because of my proximity to the University of Washington, I have some information about protesting there. You and I are 2 weeks apart with our birthdays, so you and I had the same experience with SDS and the changing to the weathermen and things like that in our youth. Yeah. What I can tell you is that the demands at the University of Washington, that the people that are there demonstrating, is that the materially and academically divest from Israel. That's 1. 2 is to cut all ties with Boeing, and 3 is to end the repression of pro-Palestine students, workers, and faculty. The sticking point. I've noted that some other places in the country that they've come together and ended the protest because the administration agreed to
to divest
with the students.
Yeah, or at least agreed to have a discussion about divestiture. Yeah,
that's right. So, but we have a tough sticking point right here is in the fact that the president at the University of Washington says, no, we won't cut ties with Boeing. Boeing's given them their own engineering school building. They've
wow. Yeah, it's going to be a tough one.
They've received the gift of a big building where they test the wind tunnel kind of thing, for
aerodynamic research, basically.
That's right, and so Boeing, it's a big problem. The school is more connected financially to Boeing than they are to the state or the students or any other entity. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to go. They're stuck.
Yeah. And
I have information because of someone in my family being of an age to go communicate and know the protesters that they are feeling a lot of danger. They're not safe.
You mean they're worried that the cops are going to come after them, or the Proud Boys are going to come after them, or a pro-Israel POA? I mean, what's the concern about their safety? All of the above.
Pro-Israel, and just that they're when you're camped out somewhere and you aren't leaving there because you need to stake it out, you need to claim it to have a place at the table, then everything that comes your way is like to sustain you for the day. Mm-hmm. Food and water, stuff like that, is dangerous. Yeah, so they have reason to be afraid.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave you with that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, MJ. That'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I get why the university doesn't want to abandon Boeing, and Boeing is really an indirect. I mean, yes, Boeing provides weaponry to Israel. They provide weaponry to countries all over the world. But there have to be other targets that would be more targeted, I would think. MJ, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. Welcome back. Ann Applebaum published a piece yesterday or the day before in The Atlantic. And it's titled Russia and China Are Winning the Propaganda War. And it's a long piece. It's like 15, 20 pages. It's a very thoughtful piece, and it's very detailed. But the essence of it is that back in the day, and this started, she starts with China and Tiananmen Square in, 89, I believe it was. Whatever the year was, June 4th, 1989. I was in China the year before. In fact, I was in Beijing. I walked across Tiananmen Square the year before this happened. And I was studying acupuncture at the International Acupuncture Teaching Hospital there. And spent a month in Beijing. And there's this, when the Chinese communists decided that they were not going to allow any more protests, that's it. And that, the whole Western influence thing. Keep in mind, those protesters in Tiananmen Square carried a 30-foot tall papier-mâché replica, or I think it was 24 feet tall, papier-mâché replica of the Statue of Liberty. They called her the goddess of liberty. This was, the world at that time in 1989 looked to the United States and said, we want to be like you. And protest was part of that tradition, by the way, apropos of our larger discussion today about, campus protests. And so the Chinese communists said, we need to shut this down in China. And Bill Clinton ridiculed them. He said, in fact, he was at a conference later that year. He was president at the time. He was at a conference later that year, and he said, actually, it must have been late. Yeah, this was. Must have been a little later than that. It was in 2000. President Bill Clinton told an audience at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, it's impossible He said, China's been trying to crack down on the internet. Good luck. That's sort of like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. Well, they did. But not only that, the main thing was that they decided that America was a source of poison to China. That our embrace of democracy was poisoning the Chinese people. And this was 89. We saw something very similar happen in Russia around 2002, 2003, maybe actually even in the late 90s when Putin took over, where he was looking at the West saying, we've got too many people in Russia who want to have an American-style democracy here in Russia. And so while, yes, they clamped down internally, the Great Firewall and all this kind of stuff, the main effort that both these countries undertook was to destroy democracy in the United States and across Europe. And in Taiwan and in Japan and in South Korea. I mean, just take down democracy everywhere in the world. Because their sales pitch is democracy is a terrible form of government. It's chaotic, it's unpredictable, it's et cetera. And so they began this propaganda campaign that is now being echoed by Republican elected politicians, by the Republican base. We don't need no stinking democracy. I don't know if you caught Rachel Maddow last night. She opened her show with this, that the Republicans, Tim Scott going on TV saying that he refused to say that he would acknowledge the result of the 2024 election, this year's election, if Donald Trump lost. Well, if we're not going to decide who rules us or who runs our country or who represents us, to be more literally correct, then how do we decide who's in charge? Well, according to the Republicans, it's us. We're in charge. We decide who's in charge, which is exactly how the Russians and the Chinese do it. And Anne Applebaum, in exhaustive detail, I recommend you read this piece. Her headline is her headline is Russia and China are winning the propaganda war. Set out to destroy democracy in the United States and Europe, and they're doing it. We're seeing the rise of these right-wing parties. We've seen the right-wing takeover of the Republican Party by authoritarians. Donald Trump is their avatar. He is America's Vladimir Putin. Very much wants to be America's Vladimir Putin. And this is a very dangerous thing, and it's a very dangerous moment. And America needs to recognize this as a threat, as more of a threat, actually, than even a military threat. Because it's a lot easier to defeat a military threat than is a mind virus.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. Even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won, education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner that people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools, improved environments, workplace collective bargaining, and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Breaking Through Power, it's easier than we think.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American Renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Let's pick up your calls and see what's on your mind today. Don in Pittsburgh. Is that Pittsburgh, Kansas?
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Yeah. What's up?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I've talked to you before about water and stuff, Phoenix and the Great Lakes and all this kind of stuff. I found a couple of interesting websites I wanted to tell you about. One is called The View from Rural Missouri by Jess Piper. You ever heard that? That was linked to it was linked to from Abortion Every Day by
Jessica Valenti.
Yeah, Jessica Valenti. And it's really, really good. It's just a woman who lives in northwestern Missouri and is a Democrat. And, she's very insightful about a milieu that you probably don't live in.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the Christian Right Observer Weekly. Christian Right Observer Weekly. They've been going since early January, and they're on their 14th issue right now, and this is really thorough. Really? I mean, these people, as you well know, these people are spooky, man.
Yeah.
And the things they're doing, and they're working everywhere to undermine us. That's to turn this into a dictatorial theocracy. And so, other than that, I just want to say, I'm glad to see some life in the protests around the country. I was at Michigan during the period of '68 and was around some of that stuff. I didn't get arrested, but they had a takeover of the administration building there, and they ended up arresting 7 people, and they beat them up in the jail and shaved their heads. But it turned out a couple of them had fathers who were influential attorneys. So that ended up costing them a bunch of money.
When was this?
But
When was this?
This was in 68 or 69 in Ann Arbor. They took.
Yeah, when I got arrested in '68, they shaved my head. That was it was tough. And
right. Well, there was a guy named. There was a guy named Doug Harvey, was the sheriff of Washtenaw County.
Yeah.
Well, he was some kind of, he was from Georgia or something originally. He didn't really fit in. So that was the end of him. I mean, this was a thing too much. But I just wanted to say also one final thing. You at one point I talked about Phoenix trying to take the water from the Great Lakes, which has been proposed by various people, and you suggested that they would take it from the southern end of Lake Michigan. Now, Tom, your Great Lakes. Which water would you want? That murky stuff from down there in the bottom of Lake Michigan, or some stuff from Lake Superior that's near pristine?
Oh yeah, Lake Superior's got the best water on earth.
Yeah, well, it's got pretty good water, and so that if you were going to take it, I don't think it's a cost-effective thing, but and you had a guy there who came in. This is probably 2-3 months ago, and he said that there had been a water compact between the Great Lakes, between Canada and the U.S. over the Great Lakes signed in 1913, and he was right, of course. But Jennifer Granholm, who was the governor of Michigan, and she's from Canada originally, she became a naturalized.
Interesting.
She was a naturalized U.S. citizen, and she thought it was worthwhile. She led the most recent Great Lakes Compact, with the understanding that the Great Lakes was losing population, was losing influence in the House, and she tried to get it done while there was still enough to get it done, and they got it done. Would that save the Great Lakes if they really wanted to take the water? No, but it would slow them down.
Yeah. Well, there's an enormous amount of water there, but the problem with using that water anywhere else in the country is transport. And of course the impact on the Great Lakes. But you know, a lot of that water flows out through the St. Lawrence Seaway, you know, through the river down to the, and, you know.
Right, so, Niagara Falls, that's a lot of water going over there.
Yeah, exactly. Don, thanks a lot for the call. Good stuff. Earl, in Vacaville, California. Hey, Earl, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Great, what's up?
Well, getting back to what you were talking about earlier in the program about protesting, I'm more in favor of organizing and establishing boycotts instead. The reason why I say that is because one of the things that the corporatists don't like is losing money, and when you take away their money, that makes them sit up and notice.
Yeah.
You know, because they have too much power in this country. They control everything. I mean, everything.
I agree. Well, that's the problem, Earl, is that you've got these giant national monopolies that have wiped out local businesses. So any kind of protest movement would have to be organized at the national level, and it would have to be directed against one of these giant corporations. And in many cases, I mean, you know, for example, there was an effort a couple of years ago to protest the Koch brothers by publicizing, you know, all the companies that they made money off of. I think Georgia Pacific is one of their bigger ones. But you know, people don't even know what the brands of Georgia Pacific are. I think Brawny might be one. I don't even know. I can't bring it off the top of my head. So what they do is you're trying to get to the owners and influence them, but you know, they've got a company, and that company owns another company, and that company owns another company, and that's the brand of which, you know, and so you don't. It's really hard.
The strategy is to pick one, concentrate on that for like a year or so.
Yeah.
First, organize a boycott. Plus, you can throw in a generalized strike. You know, go up on the internet, establish a website of some sort, and say, hey, this day we're all taking off from work. You know, screw you guys. We're all taking off from work, and that includes everybody,
right, both
union and non-union. If we can come together as a country, you know, forget about this nonsense about you know, I'm better than you are because of my skin color is lighter than yours nonsense. If we can come together and do that, then we can take our country back.
I agree. It's a huge if, though, Earl.
If we keep playing around, if we keep playing around with these people, we're going to keep getting the shaft.
Yep.
If you know what I mean.
I do. I think that breaking up these monopolies is an important first step, and the Biden administration is actually working on that. I mean, they got this huge lawsuit against Google, for example, right now. They're looking at Apple. I mean, they're going after, I think, you know, some of these people. So we'll see where it goes. Earl, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Well, how are you, first of all, today?
I'm fine, thank you. I hope you are too.
You're doing very well. Thank you, for, as usual, for all you're doing. And listen, this is important. This links directly to your reporting on Ann Applebaum's, as you said, absolutely brilliant and important article in the Atlantic now about how democracy is losing the propaganda war. Anecdotally, I was listening to a rebroadcast on YouTube of MSNBC's channel of Rachel Maddow's program last night, all of which was incredibly interesting. Did you listen to it all?
I did.
You did? I thought, well, I got 39 minutes. I got to minute 31, and the program ended and was hacked by a Chinese woman drawing a cartoon of My Little Pony. For the full 8 minutes that were...
In what venue? Was this on YouTube or what?
Yes, it was on YouTube, but it was MSNBC's channel. Now listen, this was right... It was interrupted by this woman doing this My Little Pony drawing for 8 solid minutes, right to the end of the program, right as Rachel was to introduce Ann Applebaum, who was to discuss. Right? Now, this is a little more than interesting. What I'm suggesting is that the propaganda war is not just propaganda anymore. It's not just anti-democratic speech and the propagation of anti-democratic thinking and policy. This has now moved directly into the hacking of discussions about pro-democratic propaganda. propaganda, if you will. Wow. They would say propaganda.
Yeah, no,
now, this is more than a little interesting. Something very serious is starting to go on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, someone else I know was interrupted by a woman knitting.
Huh. I wonder if those are fake YouTube sites that are pretending to be MSNBC and they're...
No.
You think somebody's actually hacked the MSNBC feed on YouTube? I find that hard to believe that MSNBC or YouTube would tolerate that.
I know. It may be more than that. They may be able to hack virtually anything already, moving directly from just propaganda into actual shutting down of the discussions.
I think they may well be there, Nicholas.
I think they are.
That's an amazing story.
It's disturbing, isn't it?
It is. It's beyond disturbing. Yeah, it's troubling. Yeah. Nicholas, thank you for the call and thanks for the information. I'll keep an eye out for that. 45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. I'll be right back with more of your thoughts and calls. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Speaking the truths that the dictators around the world would really rather you didn't know. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Howard in Los Angeles. Hey, Howard, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to push back a little bit on what you said earlier. I think you don't have your characterization of what happened at UCLA is not quite accurate, and so I wanted to let you know I'm a faculty member there. I'm Jewish, and the protests there were far from what I would call peaceful. They were intimidating. They were borderline on assault. They desecrated university property. They did not permit the flow of Jewish faculty or students freely around the campus, and they did that with intimidation and assault. You know, I felt like that that I was in imminent danger of being physically attacked.
Did you go down there, or did you think that they were going to leave the quad and come after you?
No, so I was down there. I needed to go to the library, and
you couldn't walk around this. They'd extended it so far that it was a physical obstacle.
It was very, very, very difficult to do it, and was very intimidating. And I should not have to feel assaulted just because I'm Jewish. That's that's wrong.
Well, that's the real unfortunate part of this, is that because Israel's a Jewish state, Judaism, which has nothing to do with what's going on in Gaza right now, and Netanyahu's government are being conflated, and that works to the delight of the anti-Semites among us.
Yeah, well, that's what that group is.
Yeah,
they're anti-Semitic. I mean, if I'm Jewish and all I want to do is to enter the library to do my work, and I can't do that.
Yeah,
and I get assaulted for doing that. And
were you assaulted?
Yes.
Describe it?
Okay, so
what happened?
So the clear definition of assault is not battery, but is the threat of feeling like you're going to be physically harmed imminently.
Did somebody personally threaten you?
So 3 or 4 people.
Did you take their
picture? I'm trying to go through. I said, look, pardon me?
Did you take their picture? I would think that you would have the grounds, the basis for at the very least a lawsuit and possibly calling the police.
So and you saw what the police did there. They did absolutely nothing. But So what I'm saying is that, I was surrounded by three or four people, right? And taking a picture is not going to matter anyway because all of their faces were covered. But there are, if you do really a quick look, and I can send you some links of I told you I'm on the faculty, but Jewish students who were intimidated and felt like that they were in imminent danger.
Well, that's wrong. That's just straightforward wrong.
It's wrong.
Howard, thank you for the call. Yeah, thanks for the other side of the story, as it were. It's 49 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. Rose in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Rose, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I have a question about ditzy and shameful Judge Cannon.
Yeah.
And my question
Judge Luce Cannon.
Since Trump got her appointed, how is it not a conflict of interest that she's taking his case?
We have we've never seen this kind of a situation before in the history of the United States. She has no ongoing relationship with him. I mean, he gave her the job, and she now has lifetime tenure. And I think that the position that the courts would take is that lifetime tenure means that you are no longer influenced by the person who put you in that position. You can feel gratitude toward them, but that's a different thing than being under their influence or beholden to them. Does that make sense?
Sort of yes and no, because all of her actions show that she's favoring him.
Oh,
and
I get
helping.
that. I totally agree with you. The question is she doing that because she loves Donald Trump, because she feels an obligation to him, or is she doing that because, and I think this is probably far more likely, because she does not want to be receiving hundreds of death threats? Every judge that has taken on Donald Trump, or taken on a Donald Trump case, I mean, they don't even take on Trump himself, has ended up receiving just massive levels of death threats and intimidation. And you can see where, a young woman in her 30s, or maybe she's in her early 40s, I'm not sure, but she's quite young, would feel vulnerable. And it's only a $200,000 a year job. I mean, it's not like she can afford to have bodyguards around her all the time, or, live in a super high-end gated community where nobody can get to her. So although, what we've seen, like with Nancy Pelosi's husband, is even that doesn't protect you necessarily. But
yes.
I get
absolutely.
it. But I think whatever, regardless of what her motivation is, it's very clear that she is doing everything she can to prevent this case from going to trial. And that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the rule of law, which is clearly under assault here in the United States now. It's not a good thing for our democracy, which is also under assault. Rose, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Gail in Tahuya, Washington. Am I saying it right, Gail?
Hi, yes, Tahuya, Washington.
What's up?
Good morning. Good morning, Tom.
Thank you. Good morning.
A couple of weeks ago, we celebrated my son's 19th year of being sober and clean.
Good on him.
And yes, he's done a great job, and he's still very busy in AA. But every year I go over all the information that was given to us from Lakeside Milam Recovery. And as I was going through the information, MSNBC had a segment showing the pictures of these billionaires who had at first decried Trump's insurrection. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, they're coming out of the woodwork supporting him.
Right.
But
because he says he's going to do more tax cuts.
Exactly. Yes. It occurs to me that money, power, and fame have addictive properties.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think it was a good thing to show their pictures, and that we need more information, public information, about how these things do have addictive properties, so that maybe people might recognize these individuals, and or families might recognize these individuals and encourage them to get treatment. I think we need treatment facilities for these people as well.
I agree. But I think that the main thing, I mean, the way that we try to prevent addiction in the United States is by the force of law. We try to make it hard to get addictive substances. And I think that we need to change our tax policies and our legal bribery of politician policies.
Yes, I agree.
Go ahead.
Yes, I agree with all those measures you had mentioned, but I also think that we need to educate people as far as what the signs and symptoms are, because some of these people, like Elon Musk, I believe he's having secondary psychological symptoms that are associated also with addiction.
He's clearly a very troubled man. I mean, look at his relationship with his daughter, look at his relationship, just everything. I mean, he's clearly a very troubled man, which is also concerning given the power that he has in the United States. Gail, thank you for the call. Tracy in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Tom, great show.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you again. I'd just like to say to the young man who was scared to walk around 3 protesters, if you're that afraid of 3 protesters, and he didn't get assaulted, if he would have, he could have told you exactly how. How do you think the women and children in Gaza feel waiting to get blown to pieces, first of all? Yeah. But I called about that Stormy Daniels, Donald J. crap in his pants. That photo was taken at a porn convention. The backdrop says Wicked on it. That's a porn company. So he was at a porn convention when he got that picture taken. Okay.
That kind of changes the frame, doesn't it, Tracy?
It takes a special kind of porn fan to actually go to a convention.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And I haven't heard anybody talk about this picture. They always show it, but they never say where it was taken at.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because she was talking about a picture that was taken in the gift shop, but I assumed that was the picture. But you're right. The Wicked logo is on that one.
It said Wicked on it. It said Wicked on it. That's a Wicked picture. That's porn.
There you go. Tracy, thank you for that. Incredible. It just gets weirder and weirder. Of course, it's Donald Trump. I mean, what do you expect? Incredible stuff. So, the noble lie and abortion and the state of Medicare and Social Security. What's up with these things? I'll tell you right after the break. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP, because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. A warning, your head is about to spin. David Pepper writing over at davidpepper.substack.com. Late in last year's high-stakes campaign to legalize abortion in Ohio. Remember, there was that whole ballot initiative to put it into the Ohio Constitution. And their Attorney General, David Yost, came out with he said there could be some public misunderstanding about this ballot measure. Now, this is before the election, before the vote. There could be some misunderstanding. People might not really know what they're voting for, and we need to clarify these things. And so I'm going to do an analysis of this ballot measure and tell people what it is. In fact, his exact words were, I owe it to the people to give them accurate information so they can make informed decisions. The taxpayers paid for the assessment, of course, and the assessment was clear. He said, if passed, the Issue 1 language would create a new standard that goes farther than Casey's undue burden test or Roe's strict scrutiny test, and will make it harder for Ohio to maintain the kind of laws that were already upheld as valid prior to Dobbs. In other words, he's saying, basically, if you guys vote for this thing, it's going to just mean that there are no restrictions on abortion. It'll be the Wild West. It'll be crazy. His exact words. In other words, the amendment would give greater protection to abortion to be free from regulation than at any time in Ohio history. Those were his words, end quote. So then the law passed. The voters spoke, right? The Republicans had tried everything, including David Yost. They had tried, saying, oh, it's going to require 60%. It's going to quack. None of it worked. People showed up and they voted and said, we think that women should have the right to choose to have an abortion. So now Yost comes out and says, and this is, where it gets really weird. He said, quote, this amendment was meant to restore the pre-Dobbs legal regime, a regime that allowed and upheld Ohio's waiting period, in-person abortion, and informed consent provisions. In other words, the old law that used to say, if you want to get an abortion, you have to show up, and then you have to come back in 24 hours or 3 days. I don't know which it is in Ohio. And you have to, you just have to jump through all these hoops. We're going to make it difficult to get an abortion. That's how it was in Ohio. Now he's saying, we can bring back those provisions. They're still in the law. We can enforce those. I, as the chief law enforcement officer for the state, can enforce those because this ballot measure that everybody voted for isn't what I said it was before it was voted on. I lied to you, David Yost is saying, the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. I just lied to you, he's saying. It's incredible. And this is official. I mean, he's saying this is my official position. These people are pathetic. They're just, it's like they know no shame, much like Donald Trump. All right, what's on your mind? Let's pick up some calls here. Jules in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Jules, what's on your mind? What's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I've been listening to you since the beginning, and it's about the second or third time I called, but I was at the U of O last week where the demonstration was.
University of Oregon.
I am, by the library.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to the students there, and I'm Jewish, and I would say at least probably 30% of the students, just from observation, were Jewish and were super kind to people, were helping people out, and it was a really positive scene. There were professors who were Jewish talking about the 60s there, and now they've gotten a notice that they have to vacate at 12, and the students say they're not going to leave, but it was the opposite. They were moved by all the injustices, just like you and myself feel.
So that your experience was the opposite of the person who called a few minutes ago and said that at UCLA he felt intimidated because he was Jewish.
Yeah, well, I can only tell you from my personal experience, and I wasn't at university. All I can say is the young people were inspirational, were compassionate, and they had a lot of the classic books. They had books by Eldridge Cleaver there, Angela Davis, and they were just well-informed. I was impressed. I thought a lot of them knew a lot more than I did, and I pretty much stay on top of these things because I'm an old guy like you. I'm 75. And there was a lot of kindness and a lot of love there. And
Wonderful.
There were no police at all.
That's great to hear, Jules. Jules, thanks so much for sharing your experience with us. And,
and one more thing. We'll see what happens, so stay tuned. 12 o'clock is just right
noon
around
today? You mean they're going to have to clear out in 49 minutes from now?
Well, that's what they said on the local news, but the students said they weren't leaving, too.
Yeah.
And when I was there on Friday, there was over 250 tents.
Wow. Well, we'll keep an eye on that one. Jules, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that's why I called.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
The opposite.
Thank
it
you.
was for me. That was my experience.
I got it. Thank you. Mike in Fresno, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Before I get started, there's this commercial that's showing up in California about, I need high tech to support my business. Washington.
Yeah, these are the companies that don't want their monopolies broken up, is what's going on.
I'm thinking that it's the AI people getting ahead of the game,
No, I can tell you, the group of companies that are sponsoring these ads about how we need to protect tech in the United States. This is I could be wrong on this, but I'm quite sure I'm not. It's a consortium of big tech companies that very much don't want the federal government looking into breaking them up.
Okay, well, let's get to my point. Okay, when the Access Hollywood videotape was released, I believe these following things happened. Roger Stone contacted WikiLeaks. Within 4 hours, WikiLeaks dumps the DNC files. Rudy Giuliani contacts his friends in the New York FBI. Michael Cohen is dispatched to catch and kill. Giuliani goes on TV and says the New York FBI have dirt on Hillary. Operatives at New York FBI force James Comey's hand. James Comey comes on TV and announces reopening of an FBI case on Hillary Clinton. Have I missed anything?
No, well, the one thing you might have missed is that probably the operative at the New York FBI office is that guy whose name is escaping me right now, who got busted last year for being a spy for Russia.
He was a spy. Yeah, they haven't identified that he was spying back when that happened, but shortly after they busted him. So yeah, you're right. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a good one, Mike. Thank you very much. Somebody needs to write a good, tight Maybe I should, or a good, tight, concise history of what happened there. Vanessa in North Hollywood. Hey, Vanessa, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was listening to people talking about protests on campuses, and I wondered if you had ever been on UCLA campus.
I have been. I've spoken on the UCLA campus on at least 3 or 4 occasions.
Okay, so you know how huge it is.
It is. It's
and
very spread out.
What a traffic nightmare surrounds it.
And I get lost every time I go there.
Good day. Of course. So nobody should grab at the police if they didn't get there in time. That's normal. It's really a wide open place. But that's the good thing about UCLA is that it is open and the students get to talk to one another. Mm-hmm. Maybe they want to have their 15 minutes of fame in Royce Quad talking to each other on camera, but the mainstream media is going to use that for their own purposes.
Right. Just like they did the protests here around the federal building in Portland, after the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah. So I'm glad you've been to UCLA. I hope you have an opportunity to come back again someday. And everyone should take a deep breath and listen to what the students say rather than watching the evening news. And, of course, tune in to Thom Hartmann for the real truth.
Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, the last time I was there, it was with Greg Palast. We were speaking together, in fact.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, there you go. Vanessa, thank you so much. Thanks for the call. It's nice to hear from you. It's 16 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, well, the Supreme Court may think so, but they're nuts. They're wrong. We'll be right back with your calls. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's going to be really interesting to see how Trump tries to weasel out of the Stormy Daniels testimony. The cross-examination, to the best of my knowledge, has not yet begun. And welcome back. Mona, am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes, you are.
In, Deer Park, Washington, right?
That's correct.
Hey, what's up? What's up, Mona?
Well, I have a question as well as a comment, and I'll ask them both at the same time.
Okay.
It is my very firm belief that Judge Cannon has been offered a Supreme Court judge seat, and that Alito or Thomas is going to retire so she can have it.
Trump has actually mentioned that.
I seem to remember a news story about her meeting with someone from the Heritage Foundation or someone associated with it, not that long after she was appointed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, if anybody can find any evidence of that, I mean, the meeting in and of itself doesn't need to be nefarious, but proof that she's actually been offered that. Somebody had asked Trump about that at one point, and he said, yeah, she's a good judge, or words, kind of dismissively, but maybe. He didn't shoot it down.
Yeah. So then my question is there any way possible to remove a lifetime appointed judge?
Yes, it can be done through the impeachment process, but that requires the House of Representatives and the Senate to do the whole song and dance, and it's only happened a handful of times in the history of the United States. And those were just egregious examples, every single one of them.
Okay. Thank you. That was it.
Okay. Thank you, Mona. Nice to hear from you. Pearson in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Pearson, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I agree with Vanessa's sentiments about advising people as to where and how to get a handle on the situation within Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
The gentleman who identified himself to you as a UCLA student, a Jewish American student, his story to you did not strike me as credible. It reminded me of a young girl. I say girl, she was a college-age student back in the day. This is at least a decade or two ago when Norman Finkelstein, the American Israeli scholar, who's a political scientist on matters to do with Palestine and Israel, when he was speaking at her university, the auditorium, and she stood up and she all of a sudden broke out into crocodile tears. And that experience was not my first observation of the situation where I see Norman Finkelstein, who is a reasonable voice in academia, who gets attacked by the far right and people who are interested in pursuing extremist views like Netanyahu does.
Right.
So I would remind folks, like Vanessa did, that they get their information not from the legacy media headquartered in Manhattan, but they go to left-wing independent sources like yours, David Pakman.
So you think the guy who called was a plant?
Possible. I don't know enough. I didn't hear enough of him to know that, but he didn't seem credible to me.
Yeah.
He didn't seem...
What's wrong with just assuming the guy just didn't feel comfortable? I mean, you know.
No, he seemed too calm to me, and he didn't have the kind of emotion you would expect. I believe the students, when I hear them directly, there's not the kind of a level of contentiousness that he would like us to believe.
Yeah.
That's my bottom line.
Well, we're all going to have to, draw our own conclusions. Pearson, thank you very much for the call. Always nice to hear from you. 21 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. One of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. "22 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's up?
Greetings, Professor. I'm so glad that the tech companies are so concerned for their workers. Maybe the Clinton Global Initiative can sort out reparations for the tech workers of the 90s that were burned after Y2K.
Right.
But I'm mostly calling about that meeting of billionaires. Now, I'd like to think that it would mirror the plot of Only the Rich Can Save Us. Sorry, Only the Super Rich Can Save Us.
Are you talking about the one in Hollywood last week?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm afraid I may have to update it, if only as a parody, of what it could look like. For example, let's take 8 billionaires, and each one coughs up $1 million for each of the older Supreme Court justices, so that freeing up Biden truly court pack in the next 4 years. See, problem solving. This is why we need a director of lessons learned, like we used to have.
Yeah.
But also, I'm glad that 60 Minutes rediscovered Taylorism in all but name. Let's have workers do some profit sharing instead of crawling for crumbs.
Right.
Then maybe we'd have fewer billionaires to be weighted down by all that wealth, most of it unearned.
Well, the thing that's totally bizarre about it, David, is that when you increase the minimum wage, when you treat your workers better, you actually increase the profits of your company, because now you've got people who've got money in their pocket to buy your products, the old Henry Ford story, and you've got lower turnover.
But when John Deming tried to bring that to General Motors, whatever, they said, "Oh no, you don't." But he brought it to Toyota. And
there was the Japanese model.
Well, and then the Toyota tried to do a crossover with General Motors, but neither management or even labor could wrap their minds around it, and so we're stuck in this super economics death spiral that and not even Robert Reich dressed as a Jedi Knight can save us.
I agree.
Thanks, Tom.
David, thank you very much. Vince in Beloit, Wisconsin. Hey, Vince, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Because I'm in my car.
Yeah, just fine, Vince.
Okay. Talked about the bird flu and the swine flu. Do you know what the major difference is in dealing with these?
Do you want to is that a rhetorical question? Are you asking, or do you want to tell me?
I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
One needs a tweetment, and the other one needs an ointment.
Oh God, Vince, that's terrible.
Okay.
That's not what you call
scenario.
It, right?
Scenario. Trump gets elected, but we retain the Senate. So Trump tries to put in new Supreme Court justices. So could our Senate Majority Leader stop him or not take up the vote, because a new rule comes up now that you can't do that because he's a president under indictment.
No, there's no rule like that, and if Trump becomes president again and the Senate is held by the Republicans, I guarantee you, at least Thomas is going to retire, and probably Alito as well. They're both in their mid-70s, and you're going to see 35-year-old right-wingers in there.
I was saying that the Democrats hold the Senate, and then they refuse to seat the.
Oh yeah, they could play the same game that Mitch McConnell did.
Yeah, just make up a new rule.
Just say no, we're not. Yeah, exactly. You're right on that, Vince. I mean, Mitch McConnell really blazed the path on that. Holding that seat, Merrick Garland's seat, open for 440 days. That was a crime against democracy. Vince, thank you for the call, and the horrible pun. We'll be back with more of your calls on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back with you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with your calls.
Book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. The feminism is as intrinsic to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. but they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex, and so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Steve in Portland. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Well, actually, this is related to something you were just talking about. All the hand-wringing about, the catastrophe if Trump is reelected, the end of democracy, the end of the environment, World War III, he'll be unrestrained. And I would like to hear someone calm and level-headed, such as yourself, to say, really, how bad could it get?
Okay. How bad could it get? Trump has called for suspending the Constitution, for declaring a state of emergency. So habeas corpus is gone. You can be arrested and imprisoned or even executed by the federal government without even a trial under what Trump has proposed in public. He has said he wants to drill, baby, drill all over the place. He wants to do away with all environmental regulations, or most environmental regulations. So there goes your environment. Let's see. That's end of democracy, end of environment. What am I missing here, Steve?
Well, no, but what I'm wondering about is, yes, he could try and do all those things.
Well, he gutted the EPA when he was in before. He fired, half of the scientists in the EPA were let go.
Right.
They're still trying to rebuild that organization. Go ahead.
If he does those things, won't he be voted out? Won't he lose control of the Senate and the House in 2 years, and they'll stop him?
I don't think so. Not if they end our elections. This is what Putin did. This is what Orban did. This is what Xi did. This is what dictators do. Is they make sure that their power will never be challenged. The other big thing that Trump, in fact, for people to vote, they have to be informed, right? The other big thing that Trump has said that he wants to do is he wants to change our libel laws so that public figures can sue anybody for libel, which means that any newspaper, any commentator, anybody like me, or even the New York Times, for that matter, who points out, the absurdity of what Trump is doing, or the wrong-headedness of it, or the criminality of it, can be sued into bankruptcy. And when Orban started doing this, and Putin started doing this in the mid '90s, and Orban started doing this in around 2012, both of them wiped out all the independent media. There's no more independent media left in Russia or Hungary. That's what Trump has said he wants to do. So if you don't have independent media, all you have is state media. Basically every television program on cable and on the air is just another version of Fox News. Do you really think he's going to get voted out?
I guess I was using rose-colored glasses to think that he might try, but he would get enough pushback that
if that's the law,
succeed.
If the law gets changed, if the libel laws get changed so that all of your independent writers and journalists and whatnot get sued into bankruptcy and homelessness, that's going to be the end of it, Steve. I think that these concerns are, if anything, not emphatic enough. What Trump is planning on doing, and he's said it out loud, is exactly what Orban and Putin have done, and I think he could get away with it. I really do. Steve, I got to move along, and thank you for the call. Ray in Naperville, Illinois. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Tom, first, I just wanted to thank you for the way you handle somebody who calls in and, just spouts untruths, and you present them with facts, or ask them, present facts to me, like when somebody says Hillary Clinton and Obama silenced all these conservative organizations, and you just say, well, give me a list of them, Yeah, it was yesterday. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have changed my mind about Biden debating Trump, and that, why would he debate somebody like that who is up for 91 indictments, even though I have a bunch of friends who keep on, telling me, oh, Biden's afraid. I'm like, no, he's not. No. He goes, I go, Trump couldn't handle a debate himself, and Biden will present him with facts, but I always go back to what is a real debate, and I think you do that too.
Yeah.
You know, both of us have probably debated, and for me it was in high school, and there was no interrupting or yelling or
lying,
flat out lying.
Yeah, I mean that's the big thing. It's the old joke that I think goes back to Will Rogers. You know, it's like you don't want to wrestle with a pig, because if you do, A, you end up all muddy, and B, the pig enjoys it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate the way you handle callers. Even I think it was last week, a guy called you the Rush Limbaugh of liberal radio, and you know, I have friends just like that.
Yeah.
And I have a tendency to lose my cool a little bit, and I'm like, you know, hey, Tom handles it great. His show is clean, and it's fact-driven. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for testifying. I appreciate it. By the way, just an update on what's going on with the Stormy Daniels testimony in the Trump election theft trial. When they came back from lunch, the defense, Trump's lawyers, got up and said, this testimony served no purpose. It was only to inflame the jury. Therefore, this trial is a sham, and you need to declare a mistrial and end this right now. And the judge said, well, the witness was a little difficult to control, and I was surprised that there weren't more objections from you guys, but I'm not going to give you the mistrial. So Trump loses. I'm assuming she's going to go back on the stand any minute now for cross-examination, which is where the fireworks will come. So stay tuned. I'll keep you up to date. Rich in Indianapolis. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks very much. I wrote down an observation by someone smarter than me, and they had said, we are in a civic health crisis. And I thought, wow, that's a very cool way.
You mean as in civic
it.
mental health, or civic, or the health of our civic, of our civitas?
Yes.
To use the Latin word.
Yes. The second.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I get it. I agree.
So, I'm calling in on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I wanted to acknowledge the first silence breakers who. Excuse me. I didn't mean to do that. I'm actually very choked up here. The first silence breakers were the survivor Sonderlager, Sonderkommandos. The Sonderlager means the special camp, and in the special camp that was the Konzentration, the concentration camp, they had staff to keep the Nazi staff from getting overwhelmed by the horrors that they were doing to the people.
You're right.
And they inflicted that on people that they were just choosing out of the incoming individuals. And these were called the special force, the Sonderkommandos. Mm-hmm. And they were killing Sonderkommandos after a certain period of time because they didn't want people overexposed and know too much, or that people were just falling apart. And they would just, stick a new person in.
Yeah.
And at the end of all of this, with the death camps, there were some Sonderkommandos that had survived. They endured, and then they spoke about it.
Mm.
They lived in hell.
Yeah.
And they talked about living in hell as witness.
Yeah.
And so to acknowledge what it took to endure that and then come out of it as someone who could still put a sentence together and then tell truth about the horrors that was as a testament to the wrong done.
Yeah.
And that people are being caught up in denialism around the Holocaust. I think it's really important to understand that elite Gentile is the source of the creation of the beginning of anti-Semitism, done to destabilize society, to be able to inflict a status quo that has us fractured and fighting amongst one another and credentialized and in a meritocracy that has those who will take it from authority to do what they're supposed to do, and not tell anybody about it.
Yeah, I get it, Rich.
Keep the silence.
I totally get it.
The silence breakers. Yeah, thank you, Tom. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Rich. Today would be a good day, or this evening would be a good evening to rewatch Schindler's List. Excuse me. Or something similar to that for Holocaust Remembrance Day. Rich, thank you so much. Thank you. 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a minute.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The defense in the Trump trial said she's been changing her story, and the judge says, well, the more times the story changed, the more times you should be cross-examining. And welcome back. Let's see here. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, just basically a summary of what's going on. The two key elements that are in the news right now, obviously the Israeli conflict and how it's transferred to the U.S. college campuses, and then, of course, the trial. And all that's doing, ultimately, when you look at this, it's going to work in his favor. As far as the trial goes, if he's found guilty, then you're going to continue to shore up that base, that Trump base. If he's found innocent, they're going to say, well, you see, they can't impeach him, they can't convict him of anything, so they'll stick with that. You see what It's pretty obvious.
Or the third option, which is also probably more likely to than being found innocent, is that there will be a hung jury.
Hung jury, right? And all it takes is one person. You see what I mean? That's really the significance of this. And a lot of people just don't understand how really significant this is, you know? It isn't just a simple procedure. This is something that can really change this country along with what's going on. And then the college campus situation that we're having, you got that anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim base that's his base anyway, and they're looking at the Mexican rapists coming across the border, and so all they need in the future is another Black Lives Matter protest because they're going to be burning our cities down. That's the mentality. And what's really significant about this is that's exactly what the Republicans work on, and the Democrats don't seem to have a clue. You know, they want to go through the procedure and make sure everything's done properly, but emotion is overriding logic, and it always has with his base. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree. And Republicans know how to manipulate emotion really, really well, and the Democrats keep defaulting to logic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, excellent point.
That's the Fox News mentality.
There you go. Tim, thank you very much. Brian in Portland. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, it's I'm first-time caller, and I've got a couple of things to mention. First is a question regarding the getting rid of federal judges. I think you said that the only real way to do it is through impeachment.
Correct.
Is it possible to get them out through criminal prosecution?
I don't know. I don't believe that criminal prosecution would necessarily lead to one being removed from office. There may be a law that says that. If there is, I'm unaware of it. But I would think that a successful criminal prosecution would certainly then lead to a fairly pro forma impeachment.
What about Spiro Agnew?
Spiro Agnew was indicted by a grand jury in New Jersey, as I recall, or was it Delaware? What state was he from? I forget what state he was from.
Maryland.
Maryland, thank you. He was indicted by a grand jury for accepting bribes, both as governor and while he was in the White House. And he cut a deal with them where he left the vice presidency in exchange for them dropping the charges.
So do you think...
About 6 months before Nixon got outed. I'm sorry. Go ahead and say that again.
Do you think something like that could be arranged with Clarence Thomas?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. It would require a more aggressive administration and an attorney general. I mean, I would think that this would be up to the attorney general. We're talking a federal crime, federal bribery crime here, and I don't think you're going to get anything like that out of Merrick Garland. I keep saying I want Sheldon Whitehouse as our next attorney general. If Sheldon Whitehouse was the attorney general, he would be going after Clarence Thomas in a New York minute. So. Brian, thank you for the call. It is 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com. 9 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls. Here's Scott in Cincinnati. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Electoral College Reform Act was passed with bipartisan support, which now requires 20% of the House and 20% of the Senate to challenge the certification. Last time, it was 148 members objected. However, only 8 of them were in the Senate. What do you think the chances are of this happening again there, if indeed? I think to the point where they would throw it back to the House, where the House would each have one vote to vote for president.
Yeah, I don't know. And 8 people is more than 20% of 50, isn't it?
No, it'd be about 20% of the Senate would be 20 people.
No, there's 50 people in the Senate. No, wait a minute. You're right. It's 100 people in the Senate. I'm sorry. I'm doing my math wrong in my head, and there's 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Forgive me. I'm just terrible with math in my head. No worries. It's why when I went to college to study electrical engineering, I really struggled. I don't know. Whether the Republicans could pull off a repeat performance. Keep in mind, instead of a Republican administration or Republican vice president, you have a Democratic administration right now. Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about this fall.
Right.
And so,
yes.
My guess is that they've got some other surprises up their sleeve. We do know that they're going to do everything they can to try and get it thrown into the House. But that is the main effort. I don't think is going to be so much, around certification or approval in the House or Senate. I think that is going to be around trying to manipulate voter rolls, purging people from voting rolls in swing states. So we'll see.
Well, being in Ohio, you're right. I know that I've heard you say several times, and I'm always checking that website that we have to make sure that I'm still a registered, voter here in Ohio.
Right, vote.org.
You are correct, and the Brennan Center for something, I can't remember the name of it.
Justice.
Has done a lot of research on all these things that these companies, that the Republicans are trying to do to throw out votes, like you've talked about quite a bit.
Yeah.
It is disturbing, but I still think when people talk about Mr. Trump and all the things that he's looking to do, especially with abortion and a couple other topics about democracy, I think Americans are going to say no mas. And if they are going to try every trick they can, but I think enough people will be out there to say, no, we're not going to put up with the second Trump.
We have almost exactly 6 months until the election. And in my mind, the question is how much Republican support is Trump going to lose as a consequence of this trial, as a consequence of his just going off nutty, his obscenity-laced rants. I think he's losing it, but we'll see. We'll see. Scott, thank you for the call. Joe in Reedsburg, Wisconsin. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
I'm fine. What's up?
I got a little example here to tell you. Every super pro-Palestinian supporter I've ever had read this, every one of them has changed their minds. Imagine this. The USA finished becoming a new country all its own 70 years ago. But it's all its neighbors just don't like us being here as a new country, even though we've been here more or less for hundreds, if not thousands of years. For the past 70 years, people from our neighboring countries...
Yeah, Joe, I really don't like people reading things on my program. It doesn't work. What's the point you're trying to make?
Okay, basically what I took was...
That Israel is justified in bombing the crap out of Gaza?
The percentages of the Israelis that were killed on October 7th and through history would end up being as if Canada came here yesterday and killed 330,000 Americans.
Yeah, I made that point the other day, that we freaked out when we lost 3,000 people. Israel, it would have been tens or hundreds of thousands of people. That's why I don't expect Israel to calm down any day soon.
Yeah, what would we have done?
Look what we did do on 9/11. Yeah. And that's why Joe Biden went over to Israel the day after October 7th and said, don't make the same mistake we did, because that screwed America. What George W. Bush did by bombing the crap out of Iraq and Afghanistan just destroyed our credibility worldwide. And I'm telling you, what Netanyahu's doing right now in Gaza is destroying the credibility of Israel worldwide. Thanks a lot for the call, Joe. And thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good to the people, to yourself and the people around you. Take good care. I'll catch up with you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!